So for this project, you will need a circular knitting needle. This one is a size 10. These are the Knit Picks Options needles. And you're going to need a needle that is at least 32 inches long, because we're going to have a lot of stitches all squished on here, and if it's any shorter than that, then it's going to be really hard to work with because you're going to have a hard time keeping the stitches from falling off the needle. I'm using worsted weight baby yarn for this project, and I have it doubled here, so I have two strands that I'm holding them together and using them as one. So to start off, I'm going to leave a very long tail, and I'm going to make my slip knot, and with the long tail cast on, I'm going to loosely cast on 91 stitches. So now I have cast on my 91 stitches, and you're going to want to make sure that you have 91 stitches, because if you don't, then you can have some problems when you work your first few rows and then you don't have the right stitch count. So we're going to start by working a border of garter stitch. So we're going to knit across every stitch all the way across the whole row for the first 4 rows to create our border. And I'm going to weave this tail in as I knit so that I don't have to weave it in later. So to do that, I'm going to take half of it. Since the yarn is doubled, I'm going to take one strand and hold it with the yarn that I'm using as part of my working yarn. And I'm going to knit part of this row with that tail in my working yarn. Once I get to the end of it, I'm going to drop the end of that, and then I will trim it later when I'm finished. And then I'm going to keep working across this row with my regular 2 strands of working yarn. Now that I have finished the first row and worked the second row back to the place where I dropped my tail, I'm going to pick it back up, and after I knit the stitch that it's coming out of, I'm going to hold it with my working yarn and knit at least one more stitch with it if possible. And then I'm going to go to the end of the second row and when I turn, I'm going to pick up this tail that we left earlier, the other part of it, and I'm going to hold it with my working yarn again to work row 3, and I'm going to drop it in a different place than I dropped the other tail. So I'm getting close to where this little one is hanging out. So I'm going to knit one more, and I'm going to drop that tail. And then we'll pick it up on the way back with row 4 and knit the rest of the way back. Alright, I have finished row 4, and you can see I have my little fuzzy tails hanging out where I finished with them, and I will trim them later when I'm finished. And now we're going to start working the 5th row, which is going to start the brioche rib. And this is the hardest when you're working into the garter stitch. It does get much easier once you get the first couple rows done. So I'm going to start by knitting 3. This will keep our garter stitch border going up the side of the blanket. And then I'm going to do something called knit 1 below. And so that just means that instead of knitting into the stitch that's on the needle, right here, we're going to knit into the row below. The same stitch, just 1 row below. And then we're going to pop the above stitch off of the needle and finish it up just like that. So now we're going to purl 1, knit 1 below, purl 1. Knit 1 below, purl 1. And I'm going to keep doing this until I have 4 stitches left on my needle. Alright, so now that I've worked my last 4 stitches, I would like to note that since we worked with a knit one below, purl one pattern, we have an odd number of stitches in between the 3 garter stitches on this end and the 3 garter stitches on the other end. So we still need to do one more knit one below to finish out the brioche rib, and then we need to knit 3. And that is the 5th row. And now we're going to start row 6. Row 6 is very similar to row 5, but it is offset a little bit because we're working into the back. And on the back side, all the stitches that were purls on the front side are knits on the back side. All the stitches that were knits on the front side are purls on the back side, so we're going to reverse it. So I'm going to start by knitting 3 again. Okay, and now we're going to purl 1, knit 1 below, all the way across. Purl 1, knit 1 below, purl 1, knit 1 below, and I'm going to keep doing that until I have 4 stitches left on my needle. Alright, so I've worked the last 4 stitches, and I'm going to purl 1 and knit 3. And those are the 2 rows that will create the pattern, the stitch pattern in this project. And you're going to keep repeating those 2 rows until your blanket is approximately 3/4 of an inch shorter than you want the finished size to be. Because this border, 4 rows of garter stitch here, is 3/4 of an inch wide. So when we get to the other end, then we need to leave room for the 3/4 inch border. So if you make it 3/4 inch shorter than you want it to be, then you'll have room for the border. Once you've worked several rows of the brioche rib, you'll be able to see the stitch pattern. And brioche rib has very deep ridges in it, and it's very squishy, and making that knit 1 below elongates and stretches out all the knit stitches so they're really full and puffy. And the only difference between the front and the back of this project is that on one side there is a purl ridge right here in between the garter stitch border and the last knit stitch. And on the other side there is no purl ridge between the garter stitch and the last knit stitch. Alright, so I've worked till my blanket is 3/4 of an inch shorter than I want the finished size to be. And this is what the stitch looks like. It's really dense and squishy, which I really like. This is why I'm willing to make the extra effort and take the extra time to make things in this stitch, because it feels so nice and it's super warm. So now I'm going to work a garter stitch border just like we did at the beginning. And we're going to do that by just knitting all the way across for 4 rows. And we're not working into the row below of the knit stitches, we're just working all the stitches the same. Alright, so I have finished my 4 rows of garter stitch, and now I'm going to work the bind off for this one. And this is just like a regular bind off, but it has a little bit of a trick that we use to keep it from being too tight. Alright, for this project we're going to bind off using the suspended bind off, and this creates a structure that is just like a regular bind off, but doing it in this manner helps avoid having to go up a needle size so that the bind off doesn't shrink the edge of the fabric. This is not that hard at all. If you've never done this before, just pay close attention and you can get the hang of it pretty quickly. So I'm going to start off by knitting the first stitch, and then I'm going to knit the second stitch. And normally when you bind off, you pick up the first stitch that you knit with the left hand needle and pass it over the top of the second one. And that's exactly what we're doing, but instead of removing the needle from the stitch that we just bound off, we're going to leave it in there. And then while it's still on that needle, I'm going to knit the next stitch on the left hand needle, pull them both off, and then I'm going to repeat it again. I'm going to pick up the first stitch with the left needle, pass it over the second one, and leave it on the tip of the left needle. And then I'm going to knit the next stitch on the left needle and pass the bound off stitch and the stitch I just knit off of the left needle. So keep repeating this process until you get all the way across, and then we'll tie off and I'll show you how to weave in the ends. Okay, I have finished my bind off and I've tied off. You can see this has some stretch to it so that it doesn't keep the blanket from stretching, because this stitch is super stretchy. So we don't want to keep the edge from stretching because then it'll shrink up. So now I'm going to show you how to weave in this tail. And this is actually easier than weaving in a regular tail because Brioche Stitch has these channels in it that you can just slip your tail through once you get it to that spot and leave it just like that, and you don't have to do anything to it. So I have this great big yarn needle, and I'm going to thread my tail through it, and then I'm just going to, first of all, weave it through this garter stitch just to about right here. And I want to make sure that while I'm doing that, I come down a ridge I should say, because this top garter ridge and this bottom garter ridge are several rows. But I want to get my tail from the corner down to about right here. Alright, so I've got my tail down to where I want it to be. And you'll notice that between the knit and the purl columns, there is a row of diagonally situated strands of yarn. And these are actually also on the back side too. So they make like a little tube that you can stick your tail through and not have to weave it in. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through the top of the purl stitch right there, and then I'm going to pick up every diagonal strand of yarn, and you want to be careful that you're not picking up whatever's underneath it, because that's the other side of the tube. Once you get it down far enough, make sure that you turn it over and check to be sure that your needle is visible through all of these diagonal strands on the back side, but you want to make sure that you didn't catch any of them onto your needle, because you don't want your needle to pick any of those up. So now I'm going to just thread it through, and I'm going to trim my little tail, and you really can't see that that's there. And there's really not going to be any way that it can wiggle itself out. So that can just be left as it is right there. I'm also going to do the same thing with my starting tails. And I did knit them in, but I'm also going to weave in this longer one up through the channel on this side. But I'm going to just trim the little one because it's so short. Once you get your tail woven in and you block your afghan, then you're finished.